everyone, Lena here from Interfaith Bridge Counseling, and I'm coming at you today with a new community resource where you meet and learn about other therapists in our Colorado community who I love and adore. Today's guest is a good friend and colleague that I've gotten to know the past few years, primarily as the pandemic started. So Lauran, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us about your practice, the name, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Lena. My name is Lauran, and I am a somatic and dance movement psychotherapist in Boulder, Colorado. And I've been in private practice since the pandemic, since 2020, actually, which is a very interesting time to start. And yeah, I'm doing both in-person and online sessions in my practice. I work primarily with complex trauma, with sexuality, with embodiment work, and that's what I get super excited about.
Love that. I love that. Before we started recording, we were chatting about how much I love somatic and dance therapy and how big it was for me when I was in grad school. And we're going to get into those type of details a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would love for you to kind of share more insight about is what services do you offer just up front?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mostly do individual counseling with adults. So most of my clients are at least in their early 20s or up. And I also have short-term group therapy opportunities that I do every so often that are closed, like 5 or 6 weeks groups on a particular topic. And then outside of the therapy realm a little bit, I also lead dance meditation sessions, which are a really fun and wonderful way to also get connected to your body and your self-expression and that kind of thing. And so I do those in just drop-in groups that are online and in person as well.
Awesome. And you already started to talk about the age that you work with, but I wonder what really makes an ideal client for you, like someone who's going to feel nourished, nourished, having their needs met, really valued in the work that they're doing with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, what I really love working with is getting people more connected to their bodies, feeling more connected in their relationships, especially, and also more connected in their sexuality. And so I really love working with queer and bisexual women. That's a big passion of mine. I really love working with people who are questioning sexuality or just want to kind of explore that more, get more clear about their desires or what they want in relationships. And I find I work really well with people who have similar values to me. So usually people who are more social justice oriented, who want to include their identities in how they're understanding themselves, folks who usually are a little bit more kind of aware of the wider systems that they're working with and impacting them. That's also something I orient around a lot. And so folks who are looking for that, I find that we tend to gel really well together. And also I tend to work pretty well with creative types, folks who are entrepreneurs or artists or dancers or like to kind of be more expressive in themselves and also in their therapy. That tends to be a really good fit too.
Love that. The things that really stuck out to me were sexuality, working with value, very specific value match with you, and then of course the creativity. And I'm curious, why is that important? Where do you stand on why that's important to kind of have that fit, especially when we're talking about sexuality and values? I think people get turned away when they hear the word sexuality, and yet that's such an important part to who we are as humans, no matter what age we are.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a link there between sexuality and values and creativity, and a lot of that really comes down to how do we connect with ourselves? What do we feel in our bodies, in our emotions, what's important to us? And then how do we want to translate that out into some kind of self-expression, whether that's how we express ourselves in a relationship, It's could be like what type of career we might want to go into. It could be a sexual desire that we want to express, right? So to me, all of that is almost kind of the same thing, where there's like this infinity loop we could draw between being connected to ourselves internally, and then how do we want to translate that out into the world and into relationships?
Yes. Oh my God. I love that. And I'm also kind of chuckling to myself because I always use the infinity loop too. And a lot of things that I describe, and I'm like, oh, that's how you know you're a person that I would go and see, or that I would recommend for people to see, because we're also using the same analogies over here.
Yeah, that like inner outer back, and I feel like I'm doing this all the time.
All the time, right? I feel like I don't know, when I think about therapy and just the way that I approach it, like if we're only stuck in one loop, I'm not doing my job if I'm just focused on one loop. So we have to have both loops, whatever that loop, those two loops are describing, right? Sexuality and values, creativity, self-care, individual identities, all these pieces coming in.
Right.
So I'm curious about, what do you think sets you apart from other therapists? Because we have a pretty big community here in Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that comes back to what we're already talking about. So in somatic, which just means body-centered for folks that maybe haven't heard that word before, somatic therapy or dance movement therapy, it's all very body-centered. And so that's one thing that feels really important to me, that's going to be different from other types of therapy, is really bringing everything back to what is your experience in your body, in your sensations, how your emotions show up as physical experiences, how you carry yourself, how you move, right? That's really the foundation that I use in my process. And so that's going to be pretty different than maybe other types of talk therapy or cognitive approaches or things like that. So that's one piece that feels really important to name. And then I think, again, some of the other things we've already kind of touched on a little bit, the way that I also kind of bring in the wider societal context, and that might be something we're directly talking about in sessions, or it might just be like, yes, I'm aware of the things that are happening and impacting my clients, even if it's maybe a subtext, that feels important. And just like the relational piece too. I tend to be pretty casual. I'm not like, formality has never been my strong suit, I kick my shoes off in my office. We sit on the floor half the time, so I want people to feel comfortable in my space. I tend to be a little bit more casual or like myself compared to like what you might imagine in like a more traditional setting where you have like the couch and the notepad and I don't know, whatever. So I'm just so it's like, let's be real in the space. Like that feels important to me.
Neither one of us is going to show up in like a 3-piece suit with our hair back, a pencil going forward. That's just not how therapy is going to work. I think we both feel pretty tortured.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Right before we started recording, I had shared that I went to a somatic and dance therapist when I was in grad school, and how important that I found having a relationship with my body was, primarily because for me, I'm disabled. And it wasn't until I got to grad school that I really realized that that was going to come up in my therapeutic work.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think about this important concept that we actually throw to the side, I think, in American society. And that important concept is, you have a body, and your body is just as important as your mind, because your mind can't exist without there being a body, right? And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to why it's so important to have a relationship with your body when you're coming from a therapeutic perspective, and how that might help somebody. Talk therapy is great, but if we're not actually including the body, we are missing that big loop.
Yeah. And I think actually that the relationship is always there.
Mhm.
It's just more like, do we know about it or not? Like, is it intentional or not? Is it something that we're including or not? Um, and even we tend to do this body mind split, and I really view it much more as just one system. Our
Yeah.
mental experience and our emotional experience and our physical experience, these are all extremely interrelated. And that's not even just on kind of a conceptual level. It comes down to like the way that nerves flow through our whole physical system, right? Like stuff like that, where we can bring this down to a very like scientific basis if we want to, as well as the more kind of like energetic, maybe spiritual perspective of it. So I mean, I really view everything as one system. And so if you're not including the body, you're kind of cutting out this huge piece of the system. And again, it's not that that's ever not there, but we tend to disconnect from it. We tend to lose awareness around it. There's lots of things that can cause dissociation to happen, or just letting us kind of focus more on the thought pieces and kind of ignore everything else. But then we're actually losing this huge source of information about ourselves and how we feel and what we want and all of that. And so that process of reconnecting, or connecting in maybe a different way, or a way that's maybe softer or kinder or more curious or something like that, it really just opens up a whole range of information that we get to work with that can be really helpful. It opens up a whole range of options for how we can ground ourselves and kind of stabilize when maybe the outside world is feeling more chaotic. And there's a lot of joy and pleasure and really wonderful stuff that we can connect to when we're connecting with our bodies too. And that's also the part I get excited about, because I think a lot of the time when people first start that kind of work, they might notice pain or discomfort or emotions that are really rough, and that's kind of natural that gets our attention first, and it might be the loudest. But as we work through that and connect more and more, there's also that capacity for enjoyment that comes up, and both of those get to kind of expand at the same time. So I don't know if I totally answered your question just there, but that's what came up.
I'm feeling really nourished as I was hearing you speak about it, because it's true. Our body relationship is always there. And I think that's one of the things when people come to work with me, that they're always shocked by that we talk about this. It's one of I feel like the first fundamentals that I speak about within the first 8 weeks of working together is you can't actually ignore it. You can't, it's always there. Whether you're intentional, like you said, or not, is kind of the key about your relationship with your body. And you're right, it brings that joy, it brings that community, it brings all these pieces. And we can't operate in the world without it. We just can't. We wouldn't be here if our body
physically impossible.
literally not possible.
Yeah.
So here at Interfaith Bridge, we offer low-cost quality therapy services, community enrichment programs, and then groups. And really kind of our mission is to provide people with a brave but safer, so that they can work with therapists and other educators serving teens, tweens, 20-somethings, and groups of all kinds, in really their exploration of self, spirituality, and multicultural diversity. Those three pieces at the end there are kind of our jam. That's really where we focus, because it's unfortunate infinity loops only have 2 loops, but really for us, if those 3 pieces aren't being met, we find that there's kind of a dissonance happening in people's lives. And so I'm curious, how do you see you and your services, you and your practice, aligning with that mission?
Yeah, I think I really include some of the same things that you're mentioning, and it looks a little bit different in my practice and how it runs. But I think about obviously connection to self is kind of what we're talking about around the like embodiment piece, right? That to me is really foundational, and that's what I tend to focus on in my individual sessions. And then within that, I feel like you could almost do like concentric circles or something of like, there's that sort of individual self connection. And then there's the community and group, and including cultural groups, right? The multicultural aspect might go in that like next ring. And then also that like spiritual sense of like, where do you place yourself in the universe, in the big wide world? And that to me also kind of comes up with what we were talking about around like, what are your values? What's important to you? How do you find meaning in all of this? And so I think all of those really feel quite aligned with how I work with people as well. And that's something I love in the group therapy options as well, is just giving people that extra chance to connect with others and to be having their experience, but then also in this setting where they get to hear what other people are going through and feel that connection, that like, oh yes, I'm not the only person that has this come up, right? And so that feels important too, when people can kind of connect on some of the commonalities.
100%. I think one of the ways our Interfaith Bridges values have really shifted within the last few years is this identifying of, it isn't just about individual healing. Individual healing is amazing, and it's often our access point to starting our path of healing and personal growth. But there comes a point in that individual healing where it's like, if we go back to the infinity loop, example, it's like it's going, and then it needs to funnel somewhere. And I love how you're talking about community, because that brings us back to the community healing, right? It starts to fill that up. And the more community healing we have, now we can do more individual healing. And it just keeps, that big nourishment piece, because you're right. We often think we're alone in the things that we're going through, but we're not. And Colorado's big. It's a huge place. There are more than enough people who are experiencing what you're going through. It's just sometimes hard to find them or be able to talk about them if you don't have a container with someone who can help ask those vulnerable questions and get people to touch it, So let's talk about identities. Identities are a big part of Interfaith Bridges, vision, mission, and just theoretical approach. So I'm wondering, how do you work with various identities?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll just kind of name some of my specialties in that area, which I've already mentioned a little bit, but I love working with the LGBTQ community. And so that's one place where I can really offer some kind of like specialty focus in my practice. Queer women, non-binary folks who are bisexual or pansexual. That is an area that I've put a lot of effort into kind of enhancing my knowledge and my experience and training. I also identify as a bisexual woman, so I have my personal experience that I'm bringing in there. So that's one identity that I really love to support and focus on, and that I think deserves a lot of kind of specialized attention. Like there's a lot of places that will be like queer affirming or welcoming, right? And that's wonderful, but that's still really different than working with someone who is an expert that really knows the nuances and the ins and outs and some of the things that come up for folks with those identities. So that's one piece that I've really put effort into kind of developing in my practice, and something that I love to support specifically. Going beyond that, I think integrating just all of our identities into the therapeutic process is so important. That's part of understanding ourselves. That's part of positioning ourselves in the world. And this is another place where we can come back to that kind of inner outer loop, right? Where I want to know how people are understanding themselves. What identities do they connect to that feel important to them? how does that affect their experience of their body internally? How do they carry themselves when they're maybe tapping into one identity versus another? And then what does that look like in community, right? When do challenges come up? When does maybe minority stress or something like that come up around specific identities? It could be what is relationship to power or resources, right? And so that is also going to really affect how people show up in groups and in society and in work and all of that. And so I just really like to get curious about what that is for people, how they understand it, and what sorts of influences they're aware of as they're navigating their personal path. What are the things that they're bumping into around their identities and their place in the world.
Yeah, our identities they have to have voice, right? They are
Absolutely.
organized. It's how we organize. If we aren't talking about our bodies, we aren't talking about our identities and how those two things relate, how they hold things, how they ignore things, how all of that kind of operates together, we're actually missing a huge chunk of what's going to make us feel safer, make us feel braver in the world too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think another piece of that is I really want to know like which identities feel maybe a little bit more forward for the person at the time that we're working. That feels important too. I have some queer folks that I work with where they're like, I'm gay and that's fine, and I'm working on this other thing, and it's like helpful that that's included in the process, and it's also like something else is maybe the focus, right? And then I have other folks where like that's the thing that they're really working with, and that identity is really forward, and there's questions and there's processing and there's integration that needs to happen around being queer, right? And so just as an example, like that feels important too. Like I'm always kind of tuning into like, yes, what are all the identities that someone has? And also which ones are maybe feeling a little bit more important or vibrant or like needing attention at the time. That also feels like an important piece of that process.
I love that. I love that. Especially, at Interfaith Bridge, we do virtual whiteboards like no other because we're all virtual these days. And one of the things that we do is we put those identities out on to a virtual whiteboard so that we can look at and see which ones, I love that word, more vibrant than others. And especially when you're in therapy, because it can be different than what you're actually putting out into the world in your everyday life. And that's a need, right? If there are more identities or more parts of us that are vibrant coming out in therapy, or maybe they are the same, and are there ones that are wishing they were more vibrant? It's so intricate, but being able to speak to which ones are, which ones aren't, which ones need more space, which ones can give more space, all of that, yeah, that is, that's where I get nourished. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start to wrap up a little. I know you and I could talk all day, but my last kind of question is, how do you make your services accessible? That's such a huge part of Interfaith Bridge, and people always think it's just finances, but that's not true. Accessibility is a huge spectrum. So how do you navigate that? What do you bring to the table, so to speak?
Yeah, and I'll try to talk about that maybe on a few different levels, because there's so many different things that word can mean depending on the person and their identities and what they're working with. So for me, I do offer groups and workshops, and I mentioned like dance meditation sessions and things like that are a little bit more financially accessible for folks because they're more in like a group or a one-off kind of setting. So that's one thing I like to offer if you're wanting to kind of try out somatic stuff or connect with your body a little bit more, but the individual therapy maybe doesn't feel like something that's financially accessible. Those are some great options that I have going pretty frequently. again, there's a whole range of accessibility we could talk about in terms of like physical experiences and things like that. One like super simple one that I'll name is just I do have online in addition to in-person sessions. That feels important for a lot of reasons around like transportation and, you know, if people are able to show up into my office or not, right? So that's, even though I'm doing a lot of more and more in-person sessions these days, I'm definitely keeping the online component as an option for folks who want or need it. The other piece that's important to me, especially in individual sessions, is the fact that it is really customized for people, and that I'm always tuning into like what's going to work for this specific person. I like to give people a lot of options in what we're doing and how we're working together, so that it's really customized for what's going to make sense for an individual and their experience in their body. And yeah, as you mentioned, there's a lot of assumption that, oh, I have a disability, or I have pain, or I can't move in this specific way, or I can't like dance with the way that you, I don't know, whatever concept you have of what that might look like, right? And so somatic therapy can't be for me, or dance therapy can't be for me, right? And that is so not true. And one of the specific things I want to explain around that is that when I'm working with people and their bodies, it's really about your connection to yourself. It's about awareness of what your body feels like and your internal sensations. What kind of movements feel organic or natural or authentic to you. And that could be something super, super small. It could be just working with breath. It could be just working with what's my relationship to some of the experiences that I'm having. So when people hear like a dance or movement, they kind of tend to think about things that are maybe bigger, or like jumping across the room or something that's more extreme, right? And it doesn't have to look like that at all, actually. It's much more about what is your specific relationship with your body? How do you inhabit this form that you have? And that, I think, applies to anyone, as we were talking about earlier, right? Like everyone who has a body, this is going to be a relevant question, and there's going to be some really juicy stuff around what that connection looks like for you specifically. And that's really what I'm going for. So I'm not teaching choreography. I'm not asking people to do specific movements. I'm not saying, oh, you're supposed to be moving this way and you're not. Like that's all of that is like, nope, nope, nope. That's not what's happening here. This is about you and how you're connecting to yourself.
Yeah, that's the thing. Oh, I love that. I'm getting chills about that because our bodies do, they naturally move. It's not like we're just sitting there, even if it doesn't look like we're moving. Our body is operating on a really intense level all the time. It's pushing energy, it's moving, organs are operating, right? Everything's going. Our mind, people don't like to think about it, but our brain is a literal organ. It's not just sitting there and thinking, it's got so much going on that it's operating. And that movement is so crucial, so crucial. I love talking about accessibility in that way.
Yeah.
So Lauran, thanks for hanging out with me today. How can people find you? They've watched this video, they've got my stamp of approval. How can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so my website is naturalembodiment.org, and that's where I have all the information about all the things. If you want to go check out, you know, what I'm doing and services and stuff like that, it's all there. All of my contact information is there as well. But just to say it out loud here too, my email is lauran@naturalembodiment.org. That's a great way to get in touch with me. If you go onto my website, there's also links to book a free video consultation call. And that's honestly the quickest way, just to get straight into my calendar. And then we'll have a time to talk and connect and see if we might be a good fit or see what you're interested in. So email's great. The free consultation links, if you want to just schedule straight there, that's another way. That's really great to get in touch with me. And yeah, I think that's probably the easiest.
Wonderful. All right, everyone, we are going to log off, but I will make sure that Lauran's contact info is also listed below, including how to find her newsletter. She sends out really fun, yummy tidbits and all her happenings each month. So all of that will be below. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us.